logging with the Chicke-a. Here comes the chick to tell you how the country is about to enter into a depression due to the decline in economic activity.
Welcome to the Chicke-nomics podcast, the only place you hear chickens and economics settle debates about our economy. I'm one of your best hosts tonight, Zoran Kians, with my amazing cousin,
Jane Kians,
and with our 3 times removed cousins,
Prasanka Hayek,
and Aniola Ayek. And we Ayeks, to fix your statement, will bring the best economic plans and the greatest arguments.
But anyways, let's talk about our main question. What does our Federal Reserves actually do, and why are eggs so expensive in this economy?
Now, not everyone agrees on how we manage the system, which brings us to our great John Maynard Keynes and Frederick Hayek. Third-grade Keynes argued that in times of economic downturn, the government needs to step in.
Wasting money by spending big and being reckless, which stimulate demand and get people back to work. Think of it like hatching eggs in an incubator. If conditions are too cold, you intervene. You don't just hope the sun comes out.
Hayek, on the other hand, in all his greatness, warned that too much government interference creates distortions, bubbles, and long-term instability. To be honest, overworrying.
He believed markets are better at adjusting themselves. If you meddle too much, you risk breaking the natural balance, like overfeeding your chickens until they stop laying eggs.
Well, our Federal Reserve, or the Fed, is the big rooster in charge of the economy, making sure there's plenty of money in the banks, but not too much.
What made us get a rooster for this hen house, though?
Well, for most of the 1800s, the U.S. had no central bank. Essentially no emergency support when the banking system crumbled, resulting in repeated panics and recessions. So, in 1913, Congress created the Federal Reserve to ensure financial stability, acting as a lender of last resort and protect the economy from systematic collapse.
Some tools the Fed uses is interest rate, open market operations, the discount rate or reserve requirements, and quantitative easing.
And they're basically just tools that affect interest rates, credit availability, and overall economic growth. So for our chickadees, we'll crack the eggs for you.
Interest rates. Interest rates are the Fed's steering wheel. By raising or lowering short-term interest rates, it makes borrowing cheaper or more expensive. Want to cool off inflation? Hike the rate. Want to boost the sluggish economy? Cut it.
But all these decisions eventually ripple through the economy, affecting everything from mortgage payments to credit card debt, and yes, even the cost of chicken feed for farmers. Open market operations are all about money flow. The Fed buys or sells U.S. Treasury bonds to inject or drain money from the banking system. Buying bonds means more cash for banks to lend.
Stimulating spending and growth. Selling them does the opposite, tightening financial conditions to curb inflation. Think of it like adjusting the temperature in a massive chicken incubator.
Not too hot and things overeat, too cold and growth stalls. Anyways, if banks borrow less from the Federal Reserve, the discount rates will increase.
Reserve requirements let the Feds lend directly to banks at what's called the discount rate. Lower that rate and banks borrow more. Lending more to the public, it also controls how much money banks must keep in reserve. Loosen that rule and banks have more room to lend and expand. It's the financial equivalent of losing the door.
Letting more chickens into the yard to forage, or in this case, dollars into the economy for it to work.
When all else fails, using quantitative easing, like during the 2008 financial crisis or the COVID-19 collapse.
The Fed pull out the heavy artillery.
QE. That means buying massive amounts of long-term assets to flood the system with money and restore confidence. The Fed's balance sheet ballooned from under $1 trillion to nearly $9 trillion between 2008 and 2022.
That's not just big. It's like turning the modest hen house into a full-scale industrial farm overnight.
Now, moving on to our question segment.
Keynes, what would you say about the tariff that have been enforced recently?
The tariffs that have been enforced recently are short-term tariffs, and they're basically used to secure jobs
But also, do you know this is only short term? For example, all this tariff are being reformed will only lead to inflation, and once inflation starts, you can never really bring it down.
Well, yes, the short-term tariffs do have long-term effects, but overall, they help lock in the jobs, like basically giving a shield or a safety net for them.
So basically, what I'm hearing is that when we get to a point that high inflation is going on and no one can give out money or even get loans, the government just have to stay and beg for more money to be more in debt.
Long-term tariffs can hurt consumer purchasing power, but I don't know. How would I explain that better? Let's come back to it. Okay. Next question.
By your beliefs, how do you justify the banks loaning out more money to the people and saving less, causing the reserve requirement to also be low?
Lowering reserve requirements lets banks lend out more money, putting more cash into the economy and helping it grow.
While that is true, it also means that less people will be saving. This also means that people will not be able to accumulate interest and people will not have a plan to fall back on if the economy crashes.
However, this boost in spending and investments can lead to a rise in GDP, especially when the economy needs a lift.
While this is true, it can lead to unemployment. And if we have more unemployment, will that not affect our GDP poorly?
Well, if the loans lead to a successful outcome, the initial lack of funds becomes irrelevant in the long term. In some cases, taking financial risk is necessary to create opportunities that otherwise would be out of reach.
Okay. Yeah, it helps. Once the economy is stable again, then all the inflation gets knocked off, like how she said, because it's a Kickstarter.
Next question.
I have a question for the Hayeks.
Yes.
You say recessions are necessary, market corrections. But how do you justify letting millions lose their jobs, homes, and savings just to purge inefficiencies? Isn't it better to use fiscal and monetary tools to soften the blow rather than let economy free fall and just hope that the invisible hand catches it before it hits the coop floor?
The reason why people are losing their job is because businesses can have a lot of employees due to inflation because of you guys' economic strategy, which is spending more. Spending more will force the companies to try and get rid of as many employees as they can in order to save money. If you keep all the employees in, you can't pay them the same money as you used to because due to inflation changing everything.
Not just that, but we can also see real life examples such as the COVID-19 or in the Great Depression. While the recession did negatively impact people, saving was the thing that helped them to be able to build up. It was kind of like a starting point, and they were able to take the money they saved and build off of that and to get out of the recession.
Okay, I understand that, but by letting it self-correct, isn't that a really slow and painful process?
It's still gonna work.
Remember back in the 1930s? Yes, it'll work, but it's also slow, and it's the people struggling to do better.
It still works compared to making inflation go high and too high for us to even solve it.
Moving on to the last question. If you oppose QE because it distorts prices, how would you help the economy avoid deflation and mass unemployment during a demand shock?
Honestly, our whole entire, what we stand for and what we believe in, our whole entire brand is saving money, which ultimately is going to help lower deflation and help with inflation rates, because if you're saving more, you're accumulating interest in the bank. So overall, it's going to help people accumulate more money. And that also ties into unemployment, because if by some reason unemployment rates drop, people will have a backup in the bank and the interest rate will cause them to accumulate more. So overall, they'll have more to fall back on to be able to get out of the situation they're in.
And UKans believe that spending is gonna be the best thing or taking loan. But what would you do if the interest rate of the loan is too much for you to even pay back? And what if you lose your job the next day and you have debt due to you losing your job?
But when you stop people from spending money on businesses and investing, deflation kicks in, unemployment rises, and confidence drops through the door. And like that would just cause panic. Like I get you don't want to spend money, you want to save to gain more, but like at the same time the Federal Reserve can only hold so much before you have to get rid of it.
That's when you can spend the money, because if you spend it all now, what
There's
else money
nothing to hold.
there's nothing
There's
to
nothing to
spend.
Okay, but if you wait, then there's crisis, then there's panic, then nobody knows what's
That's
going
when
on.
people spend, when people know that they
There's
have
crisis.
savings.
That's true.
That's when
During
people
the COVID-19, like people were going out buying all the toilet paper, all the sanitizer. If they had
Yes.
spent all their money beforehand, there would be nothing to spend. Everyone would be cooked,
yes.
pretty much. Yeah.
All right, well, that's the end of our podcast for tonight. Alrighty, chickadees, signing out for the night. See you next Tuesday.
Bye. Bye.